Hey guys, it's Planet Discus Fish Tank. So previously I showed you how to drill the 75-gallon aquarium to set up the overflow. I also showed you that I was treating the juvenile discus with an antibiotic called Maricin 2. So I tracked that progress and it worked out pretty well. I thought it was going to kill some of the bacteria in the biomedia. I thought I was going to see ammonia spikes, but based on the measurements, it looked like it didn't do any harm to the biomedia. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the plants are able to absorb any ammonia and nitrites and nitrate spikes. So that went well. So this week I'm going to start a new project. This is going to be the Dutch style aquascape, and I'm going to cut this up into 4 parts. The first part, which is this video, I'm going to give you an intro to the Dutch style aquascape. I'm also going to start the substrate and the hardscape. Part 2, we're going to go ahead and do the softscape. We're going to plant it and we're going to stock it. Of course, I'm going to stock it with discus, so please stay tuned for that. In part 3, we're going to do the CO2 review, the CO2 system, pressurized carbon dioxide that I got online. It's pretty good value, pretty low cost, and it's working pretty well so far. And finally, part 4 will be focused on the dosing of the fertilizers. It's a DIY type of liquid fertilizer, and it's pretty simple. You don't have to make measurements. So what is a Dutch style aquascape? The Dutch style planted tank was popularized in the Netherlands in the 1930s. It is characterized by the high density of plants, which emphasizes a contrast in plant color, leaf structure, leaf texture, as well as contrast in height and sizes. And also notable are the plant arrangements. Typically plants are grouped that form streets or pathways, which creates depth and flow. And so here are a couple examples of Dutch aquascapes from the AGA website. These are some of the contest winners from a couple of years ago. As you can see, the Dutch style is a very beautiful style. The opposite style would be the nature style, which is also beautiful, but just 2 different styles in aquascaping. And so far, I've really focused on the low-tech nature style, but this time we're going to go high-tech and heavily planted, with addition, of course, of discus. And so with that, here is part 1 of the Dutch style aquascape. So here's my 75-gallon tank. In the previous video, I drilled a 1-inch hole for the overflow, and this overflow will allow me to perform automatic water changes, and it'll also allow me to remove all the equipment out of the main tank and onto a separate sump. I decided to use the Dragon Driftwood into this aquascape. Dutch aquascapes typically don't use a lot of hardscape, but I'm going to make an exception for this situation. We're going to have the Dragon living in the garden. So after a few weeks of soaking, this driftwood didn't quite sink. So I decided to add rocks and tie it to the bottom of the driftwood to weigh it down. So I used zip ties to hold the rocks onto the driftwood. I drilled a few holes to get the zip ties through. Also notice that I have an egg crate at the bottom of the tank, and this is to protect the glass. So here I get to start adding the substrate. Once again, I'm going to use organic potting soil, and I've blocked off the front with 2x4s to keep the dark potting soil away from the front of the glass. And now here is the fertilizer. I'm I'm using Osmocote, this time Osmocote Plus. The Plus adds iron, zinc, and other trace elements, along with the macros, the NPK. That's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And I'm spreading about 5 tablespoons of the fertilizer, and I try to mix it in with the potting soil. Here I have some gravel. This is from Home Depot, just cheap gravel, and I'm using this to put weight on top of the potting soil. That way the potting soil doesn't float up to the surface. So next is the sand, and I'm using all-purpose sand from Home Depot again. This is $5 for 60 pounds, and I typically just need 1 bag to fill a 75-gallon tank. And I spread it out about 1 inch thick. And so notice I have a slope here. From the top left corner is the highest point. It's about 6 inches of substrate, and it slopes down and slopes to the right to about 1 inch at the front edge. And that wraps up part 1 of our 4-part series. I hope you enjoyed it, and next week we're going to start planting and stocking the tank. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.